The launch of Sputnik 1 in 1957 began the space race between the US and the Soviet Union. This added to the fears of a powerful Soviet Union and their military abilities. Sputnik was an interesting launch because scientists really didn't know how humans would handle the flight through space. So they put a little dog in Sputnik. Her name was Laika, and she didn't survive more than a few hours. They didn't expect her to survive because they didn't have any plan to deorbit Sputnik. In other words, Sputnik would never land. But they did want to see how it would affect a living creature. So poor Laika was the pioneer who took us into space. And in 2008, the Russians actually created a statue and erected a statue in her honor. But in 1957, the satellite showed how the USSR was way ahead of the United States in space technology and possibly military technology as well. Did this mean that they could produce better missiles than ours? The United States responded by creating NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Scientists and the military were trying to outdo the Soviets, and you can see the cover of Time magazine shows the very deliberate contest between the United States and the Soviet Union to get to space, and the target was, of course, the moon. Also in the United States, we start to see an increased amount of fear towards communists. This is known, of course, as the Red Scare, and it became more intensified after World War II. Americans feared that communists were working in high-level government jobs, and this resulted in the Smith Act, which outlawed any teaching or even suggestion of a violent overthrow of the U.S. government, of course, particularly by communists. So the government establishes the House Committee of Un-American Activities, otherwise known as HUAC. And this job of this organization was to seek out suspected communists living in our society. They probed the government, the military, unions, education, and science to find these people. There were no holds barred. One group of suspected communists were a group of actors, directors, and writers that worked in Hollywood. These 10 people were rounded up and accused of treason, betraying the United States. And the defendants pleaded the fifth. So they took a vow of silence. They were not going to speak about their activities. And the Hollywood 10 were sent to prison and blacklisted. So is this free speech? Is it become a crime to be communist? Part of the fear is that we never knew who the communists were. ALGER, for example, had worked in the U.S. government for years, and everybody was very alarmed because he had a fabulous reputation. Everybody was very alarmed when he was accused of being a spy. However, a former communist named him as one who had given out information about the U.S. government to the USSR. As it turned out, ALGER was tried and convicted for giving the former communists confidential government documents. So the communists that he was dealing with turned him in. And this fueled the Red Scare even more. In another case, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg were also accused of spying. They were accused of passing secret information about nuclear science over to the Soviets. Their case rested on just one witness. The Rosenbergs were both found guilty and executed in 1953 in the electric chair. Recent evidence has been found to prove that both Hiss and the Rosenbergs were in fact probably communist spies. The case of the Rosenbergs and Alger Hiss justified and fueled people like Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin. He was a senator who really bought into this idea of communists hiding within our country, and he claimed to have a list of 205 communists who were actually working in the United States government. He never really revealed the list. In fact, he didn't really reveal the list at all. He simply waved around this piece of paper. And now, of course, we believe that this list never actually existed. This period in the 1950s of reckless accusations with little or no evidence is known as MCCARTHYism. Because of the McCarthy scare, this gave him great power. He named many people who faced blacklists, imprisonment, deportation, and ruined reputations. Many of McCarthy's hearings were put on television for the United States to watch. And when this happened, people watched him, and he actually really made his own bed. He got caught in his own lies as he bullied defendants, lost credibility, and eventually people began to see him for who he truly was. This caused him to lose power in the Senate, and the Senate actually condemned his actions in 1954. You can see their picture on the right there is portraying McCarthy with this faked list that he's holding in his hand and a doctored photo. So they're saying that all the evidence he had was fabricated. Of course, it's on fire, and he's sweating from being in the spotlight. So we're going to end this presentation on McCarthy and some of the troubles that we encountered here at home in the United States, and we'll talk more about this in class tomorrow. See you then.